In this podcast, I will give an overview of the endocrine system. I will talk first about the classes of chemical signals that are involved in the endocrine system. Those are the hormones. We will define hormones and we'll look at the different classes of hormones. And then the third part, and this is the biggest part of this podcast, we will talk about the actions of hormones. What do they do in the body and how they do it, and what are the major effects of hormones on the body. So let's start first by looking at chemical signals, and this is in this slide it shows the different types of chemical signals that are known to exist in animals, and they have different functions. But in this podcast we are going to only be talking about one class of chemical signals, and those are the endocrine the endocrine signals. Those endocrine signals are produced by a special group of cells in the body. Sometimes they are grouped into glands known as the endocrine glands. Those endocrine signals are released into the blood, and they travel a long distance to act on target cells. So their mode of action basically is long distance through release into the bloodstream to act on target cells, and then their action is usually has a long-term effect. The hormones themselves are released in small quantities, but their effect would last long. Hormones are known to be organic molecules, organic by nature, and they come in three different forms. The first class of hormones is quite complex and large, and those are the proteins or the polypeptides, and this is one of them here. Those polypeptides usually come in different shapes and forms depending on the number of amino acids that they have, and they act on membrane receptors. Since they are large molecules that cannot cross the membrane, they act on membrane receptors and trigger changes inside the cell. The second group or second class of hormones is derived from amino acids, and in general they are known as the amines because of the amino group that they have in here with the nitrogen. An example of amines is epinephrine, also known as adrenaline. Those molecules are normally polar molecules, so therefore you would find their receptors on the surface of cells. The third group of hormones are the steroids, and those are nonpolar lipids. Therefore they would have their receptors inside the cell, in the cytoplasm. Examples of steroid hormones are cortisone, also known as cortisol. You have the sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. Now, what is the mechanism of action of hormones at the cellular level? At the cellular level, hormones can do lots of things, but we can group those mechanisms under 5 major categories. The first one is effect of hormones on the permeability of the cell membranes. So they can change the permeability, they can make cells more permeable or less permeable by activation of certain transporters, or the activation of channel proteins or receptor proteins in the membrane that would lead into facilitation of the movement of certain molecules in and out. Another mechanism is through the stimulation or the activation of protein synthesis by facilitating the transcription of certain genes and therefore the production of certain proteins. A third mechanism of hormone action is the activation or deactivation of enzymes inside the cytoplasm of cells. And this is usually done through phosphorylation, by adding phosphates to proteins, or by removing phosphates from proteins and therefore rendering them inactive. A fourth mechanism of action of hormones is that of the stimulation of secretion by cells of different types of chemicals and signals. And this is usually done through a signal transduction pathway, so it's hormones binding to receptors on the membrane, causing the activation of a signal transduction pathway that would lead to vesicles carrying certain chemicals to fuse with the plasma membrane and therefore releasing those chemicals into the extracellular fluid. And the last effect is the stimulation of cell division, of mitosis. Hormones can activate certain proteins involved in the preparation of the cell to enter the M phase, or the cell division in the cell cycle. Now, what do hormones do on the entire body? What are the effects, the generalized effect on the entire body? And here we can actually look at hormones as regulators of physiologic activities in the body in general, and we can group those physiological activities under three major categories. The first one is the effect of hormones, or the regulation of hormones, of homeostasis. So homeostasis as a physiologic process in most cases is regulated by hormones. The second one is the effect of hormones in inducing responses to changes in the internal as well as the external environment. And the last one is the effect of hormones on growth, development, and reproduction. So let's look first at the effect of hormones on the control of homeostasis. And here we are going to give two examples. The first one is that of the hormone antidiuretic hormone. So let's write that down here for you. So it's the antidiuretic hormone. It's an antidiuresis, and diuresis in general means the loss of water usually through urine. An antidiuretic hormone, it's a hormone that helps the body maintain water by allowing the kidneys to retain water as opposed to losing water to urine. This hormone is produced by the hypothalamus and released by the posterior pituitary gland into the bloodstream, and therefore acting on the kidneys to preserve water. The second example is that of the hormone erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is a hormone produced by the kidneys under the effect of low levels of oxygen, or whenever the number of red blood cells in the blood drops. Erythropoietin is released into the blood, and it acts on the red bone marrow and bones, causing the stimulation of cell division from stem cells, resulting in the formation of red blood cells that are released into the blood. So erythropoietin is an important hormone that regulates, in that case here, the number of red blood cells in the blood. The second generalized effect of hormones on the body is the regulation of the internal and the external or response of the body to internal and external changes. So let's first look at how hormones actually regulate the response of the body to simple changes in the body. And here we give the example of that of the food coming from the stomach and entering the first segment of the small intestine, the duodenum. The food coming in is highly acidic, and reaching the small intestine, the duodenum, which is usually basic. So that's going to trigger a change in the internal environment, and this change would trigger the release of certain hormones that would allow the neutralization of that food that entered, which is partially digested, that entered the intestines here, by the release of, for example, bile from the gallbladder, from the liver. So the mere entrance of the food here would cause the release of bile, which has some bile salts that are basic in nature, helping neutralize the acidity of the food entering from the stomach. Some hormones also help the body respond to complex changes, specifically here changes that would cause stress on the body. And then here the hormones would allow the body to deal with short-term stress as well as long-term stress. Let's first look at short-term stress. And the best example of short-term stress here is the response known as the fight or flight response. And this is this response is mediated by the hormone epinephrine or adrenaline. As we have seen earlier, epinephrine would act on receptors that would trigger lots of changes in the body. The hormone is released by the adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidney, and that adrenal gland, in response to stressful situations, so in that case here, encountering a deadly snake, would trigger this response. The adrenal gland would release adrenaline into the blood, and then adrenaline would act on different kinds of cells to cause this generalized response that would help the individual deal with this stressful situation. Example of the effect of epinephrine is it's going to cause an increase in the increase in blood pressure, increase in oxygen consumption by the brain, so it would cause vasodilation to the brain, vasodilation of blood vessels to the muscles, so that the person can actually respond by, in that case here, probably the person would run away, move away. It would the epinephrine would cause the relaxation of smooth muscles in blood vessels, causing the blood vessels to vasodilate. It's going to direct the blood from the digestive system towards the heart. It's going to cause an increase in the breathing rate, so that more oxygen would enter the system, and therefore delivering lots of oxygen to the parts of the body that would need that oxygen in order to make lots of ATP to deal with this stressful situation. So that's a short-term effect, and that usually would last usually a few minutes. There are also hormones that would help the body deal with long-term response to stress. And then here it's the adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidney, and the adrenal gland releases a group of hormones known as glucocorticoids, such as cortisol or cortisone or corticosterone, and those hormones, basically what they do is they increase the level of sugar in the body. They affect the metabolism of carbohydrates in general, and their role is to maintain a constant supply of nutrients to the body over a long period of time to deal with a stressful situation. The last effect that we know of hormones on the body is their effect on the development and reproduction. So if we look at their effect on development, sex hormones such as testosterone and estrogen are involved in early from the embryonic stage in determining the development of the sexual structures in the body. For example, the male hormone testosterone is involved in inhibiting the female reproductive tract in the embryo and the development of the male reproductive organs. As you know, an embryo would develop first as a female, and then if the genes for the production of the testosterone and other hormones in the male are present, then they are going to be expressed. They produce the different signals that are needed to inhibit the development of the female reproductive system, allowing thus, in that case, the development of the male reproductive system. For the estrogen, their presence would allow the development of the female reproductive system. So that's in the embryonic stage, and later on in life, after birth, these hormones are needed for the maintenance of the reproductive structures in both sexes. Another hormone that is involved in the development process is the growth hormone. This is a protein that is produced by the pituitary gland, and it isn't involved in helping the body attain full adult size. So it's especially important from right after birth all the way to adulthood in allowing the different parts of the body to develop normally and proportionately. And that concludes the screencast.